Hello and welcome to the first in Shout Out Loud's career series on YouTube. I hope you enjoy all the videos we've got coming out for you. I'm Sophie de. I'm going to be hosting this first interview today, and we've got Dominique here to talk to us, who is the head of learning and interpretation at English Heritage. Now, before we go into the role, I thought it would be quite interesting just to get to know a little bit about you as a person, Dominique. It's a bit of a broad question, but tell us about yourself.
Okay, so I grew up in New York, so I'm American originally, and I spent most of my life until I was about 22 living in the US. I did my undergraduate degrees in applied physics and mathematics, which aren't topics that you would necessarily associate with English heritage. But I was really interested in the way the world worked, and I really thought that science and physics were the best way of answering questions. You know, there was a right answer that you could get to. And I guess over time, I became more interested in the gray areas, and I decided I wanted to study archaeology. So I did some excavations, and I went off to Oxford to do my PhD in classical archaeology. And while I was there, I started working at the Ashmolean Museum in the coin room. And
that sounds really cool.
It was really, really awesome. I mean, the coin room was this kind of magical world. It sort of looked a little bit like Ollivander's wand shop when you went in there, but except it was double height, these wonderful old cabinets, coin cabinets, each of which had these little double doors that opened up. And in the center of the room were people looking through magnifying lenses and weighing coins. And it was just this incredible environment. So I worked there for a little while, and I got taken on to work on the big redevelopment project at the Ashmolean. My engineering undergraduate degrees meant that I had some experience of making three-dimensional architectural models, and they hired me to do some of these 3D computer mock-ups. And it was just a blast, and I learned all about, you know, actually the objects are really interesting, and I was interested in them, but how the public encounters them, how you can create opportunities for people to learn about things just as they're wandering through a museum really kind of seemed like an incredible challenge. And so that's what gave me, I guess, the interpretation bug.
The role you're now in at English Heritage, head of interpretation and learning, if we start with just a description of what that role actually entails, because I know what interpretation means because I happen to be studying it right now, but before I did that, I had no idea really what it meant. So yeah, if you describe the role you're in.
Absolutely. I mean, museum sector, probably just like every sector, is really bad for lots of jargon. So I'm going to try to say what I mean, as opposed to use all the shorthand that we use in the sector. So interpretation are the panels that you see, the little labels under objects, the collective stuff, typically that has words on it, that when you go to an exhibition, helps you understand what you're looking at and helps tell a story as you go around. I have a pretty broad remit, so it's a bit listy, so I'm going to say it anyway. So publishing is one of my areas, or my team's areas. So we put out English Heritage's Red Guides. Those are the guidebooks, and they're really brilliant. But we also put out other kinds of publications. We've recently put out a poetry anthology, where we commissioned amazing poets and also young people to write new poems inspired by our properties. So that's getting published. We've done collections of short stories, and probably the kookiest thing we've done is a cookbook based on a Victorian chef called Mrs. Crocombe, who was the chef for a great house, like a country house called Audley End House. And we have, you know, there's an artifact of her cookbook, and we work with a food historian called Dr. Annie Gray and chefs, and together they've modernized some of the recipes. My teams also do the architectural reconstruction. So they do the graphical reconstructions of properties. So you might see a castle and it's in ruin, and one of my colleagues, Carlos, and his team, they sort of will help you understand what that would have looked like in the past. And they work really closely with our curators and historians to make sure that it's as accurate and as sort of based in evidence as we can possibly do it. I'll also oversee the learning team that delivers and sort of puts together all of our schools programs. English Heritage gets around 365,000 school visitors a year, which is kind of incredible. Also, the digital curatorial team, so they do all the Blue Plaques profiles, a lot of the history hubs on our website. So we'll sort of bring together a lot of different topics in one place under a theme. The history pages attached to our properties, and on-site digital interpretation as well. And our National Youth Engagement Team, Shout Out Loud, which is how we know each other. Yep.
Shout out loud.
Exactly. And the Contemporary Art Commissioning Program that English Heritage started very recently. That's another one of the areas that I kind of help to look after. So it's pretty exciting. I think I've got the best job in England.
I remember when I went, because I'm a young producer, obviously, as you know, for Shout Out Loud. I remember coming to visit the London offices, and you gave us a tour. This is before the pandemic now as well, so this is a while ago. But I remember finding all the desks and everyone doing all the different bits, like we're working on the guidebooks and working on, I think there was a guy working on the graphic reproductions. I was like, this is so cool. And when I remember is when I'd obviously I was starting to become aware of interpretation as a role and as something that I might be interested in. I was like, that job sounds so cool. Right up my street. I have gone down the more traditional route of studying. I loved history at school, studied it as an undergraduate degree, and I am now doing a museum and gallery masters at university. So I've definitely taken the kind of stereotype route in, but I feel like there's often a perception that that's the only way in. But that's definitely not the case, and it's becoming lesser and lesser of the case as time goes on. That young people can be doing that might not want to go to university and take that route and actually take other routes. And yeah, things you'd recommend that they do that they could get into these kind of roles.
Yeah, well, I think the sector has recognized that we kind of have a problem, that there's not just a perception that it's very, very academic, but also that it's really difficult if you're not kind of involved in some way in the heritage sector or the culture sector generally to understand what people mean. You know, even the word interpretation is just really impenetrable for if it's not part of your everyday vocabulary. And you know, why should it be? You know, it's not a word that we use a lot. So I think, you know, what English Heritage is doing, what a lot of organizations are doing, are setting up apprenticeship schemes. We have a lot more work to do, though, especially through non-voluntary routes. I mean, English Heritage has a really robust volunteering program. Most museums and heritage organizations do as well. That was, in some way, that was how I got involved in museums. When I was a PhD student, I started volunteering at the Ashmolean. And that's not a route that's open to everybody. The areas that people want to get involved with, I think there's also a perception that, you know, if you're in the culture or heritage sector, the only jobs that matter are ones that are in the curatorial side of things. And that's not really true. I think we've seen that communicating about heritage is something that, you know, requires so many different types of skills and so many different types of departments. And as an organization, we wouldn't function without all of the teams around us. And no one part of the organization has more value than another. So you know, I'd say that getting involved in heritage is, if you're interested in history, definitely study history. That's a great way to start out. But if university isn't for you, you know, there are ways to get involved through apprenticeships, through access to work schemes, and through just getting involved in getting visitor services jobs and starting out sort of, you know, working on sites as welcoming guests and getting to understand how the sites operate. The recent, our historic properties director sort of retired, I think it was about 1.5 years ago now, but she started out sort of on the floor of the shop in an English heritage property and worked her way up to be historic properties director. And I think that's a really important thing to remember, is that I've had a very privileged educational background, but it's not required. I think perceptions of barriers as well, and the perception of a barrier is just as much of a barrier as an actual barrier. So I think we have an obligation, and we want to tackle these things, because, you know, there's loads of creative, interesting, intelligent people out there who would be enormous assets to our sector, who aren't pursuing jobs because they don't feel like they'd be welcome. And I think we're trying to change that as well. And part of that is what the Shout Out Loud program is about, and I hopefully these videos as well.
It's definitely what, as you were saying, that is what where my brain went, was the Shout Out Loud program. I was lucky enough to obviously get a placement job with them, working with them, and that was before I decided to do my master's. And it was, working with other young people who may not have had, who've had very different backgrounds and roots in, and actually what it showed me, even someone who came at it from a passionate about history angle, even then it showed me different ways you can get into it. Like, I'd never considered doing like Instagram and social media as a career within the heritage industry, and yet suddenly I was doing a job that was managing an Instagram account, but also getting to do lots about history at the same time. And I think that's it was a very valuable lesson for me to learn, that it's not just if you've done history and then you study it and then you go into an industry like that, actually there are many ways you can go in, travel into it. On the Shout Out on Instagram, we did a thing for International Women's Day, and you would interview or asked to write a small paragraph to put on their stories, wished you'd learned earlier in your career, earlier on in the journey, that you'd learn that the loudest voices and most visible people are not necessarily the ones with the best ideas. And that particular sentence did resonate with me, because it's definitely where I am. It really resonated with me, because I thought, actually, that's quite an interesting take. And I was wondering if you wouldn't mind just expanding on that, given your experience.
Everybody feels that at some point. And especially if you feel like you're the only one in another kind of a group, and everybody's loud and everybody's talking about whatever, and everybody seems so exciting.
It's that whole thing of just don't compare yourself to what other people are doing, because they've got different circumstances, different skill sets, and it's also, again, trying to put your skill sets to work for you and all of that. And it's definitely something that I think is very important to learn, is just try not to focus on anything else and focus on you.
Two other things. One is that what organizations need isn't cookie cutters of the same 5 cookie cutters of the same person. They need people whose skills complement each other. And good managers will think about that, and good managers will hire people who tend to be smarter than them or better than them at an area that that's how I try to find people in my team who are better than me at the stuff that I think I'm pretty poor at. The other thing that I was going to say is that most people, whatever job they have applied for and not got more jobs than they've ever had in their life. So, whatever position somebody has, whenever somebody gets a job, you don't know how many rejection letters are supporting that.
Are underneath that,
Are underneath that. And, and that's something that continues through your whole career as well. So, that's another thing to keep in mind. And it's something that nobody really talks about. So, you got to let all the positivity of social media be balanced with the reality check sometimes. That, that failure is part of life, and it's not failure, it's just experience.
It's definitely experience. It builds on and gets you to the place where you're going to end up, and you wouldn't be there without all of that, kind of all the no's and the rejections, because you learn from them. So we're going to end this in a minute, but I was thinking one thing to end on. What would you say one of the most fun or coolest or exciting things you've done in this particular, in your role at English Heritage at the moment? I don't know if that's quite a hard question.
There's so many things, right? Like I said, my job is amazing. Somebody will be lucky to get it at some point when I move out of it. So a few things come to mind. One is that I have been inside the stone circle at Stonehenge.
That's cool.
It's amazing. Also been to the winter solstice at Stonehenge. Also amazing. Now, winter solstice is open to everybody, so it's not related to my job. And the Stonehenge Stone Circle one isn't related to my job either entirely. But the thing that I've done that's the coolest is that when I visit sites, and particularly when I visit castles, I try to convince the site manager or somebody to take me up to the roof of the castle. And it's like my favorite thing to try to do. So I have selfies on the roof of a bunch of castles. That is my favorite sort of privilege thing that I have done.
Cool. I bet I can just picture all the site managers going, "Oh, Dominique is on her way, get the hard hat. She's going to want to get up on top of the castle." We've covered a lot, and I think we've hopefully given people a good idea of of your role, and also just in general getting involved in the industry with an organisation like English Heritage. So thank you very much, Dominique, for talking with us today. It's been a pleasure. It's been really nice to speak to you again from personally as well. And yeah, I hope everyone has been able to like get something from this video, and keep an eye out on the YouTube channel for more careers videos and more talks with members of staff at English Heritage. So yeah, thank you, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.